Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So today I'm very excited because I'm going to be sitting down with Scott Kesterson, who's the host of BardsFM. And if you're not listening to BardsFM, I highly recommend it. I'll make sure that the links to his channel are put in the description below the video and podcast, because he's someone that I think has a very important voice in America right now. Because if you look at what's happened, especially the past couple of years, it feels like as the patriots and the people that love God and freedom in this country, we've had blow after blow after blow, defeat after defeat after defeat. Look at what's happening in Maricopa with Kerry Lake. Look what happened in 2020. Look what happened at the midterms. Look what happened with the, cyber symposium. Any number of things that we had all these hopes for that didn't end up turning out as the solution to what we need to make some big and fundamental changes to fixing this country. And so Scott and I are going to get into a deep discussion about really where we're at, what the real issues are, and how we can basically get our country back on track, because it is a challenging thing to tackle. And I'm sure that you're very well aware of that. But also, before we get started, folks, make sure you're following me on Telegram and Truth Social at Man in America. I'm also on Twitter at Man in America US. If you've got a little more trust in Elon these days, which, perhaps you do. I know he's winning my heart a little bit. I'll admit that. But he's not winning my trust completely, as we'll get into. Trust me. Now, you can also catch every episode as a podcast if you just want to listen. The links to my podcast and social media are all in the description below, or just search for Man in America in your favorite podcast app, and make sure you leave me a 5-star rating. It really helps me to reach more people. Also, folks, much of the world is going through a process that experts are calling de-dollarization, and China and Russia are leading the charge. So what's this mean? Well, the US dollar is a fiat currency, meaning it isn't backed by anything of value. The only thing that really gives our dollar value is its demand around the world. But now, especially under the corrupt and incompetent Biden regime, the world is losing faith in the dollar, and it's very close to losing its status as the petrodollar and the world reserve currency, especially now that the oil-producing nations are abandoning the U.S. for China and other BRICS nations. But what happens if the dollar loses that sacred status? Well, the value of our dollars, our life savings, IRAs, stocks, bank accounts, etc., could literally be wiped out in a matter of months, weeks, or even overnight. And look, I'm not a financial advisor, so please do your own research. But I believe that now, more than ever, it's a good time to consider transferring at least some of your wealth into physical gold and silver. Folks, these are real-world assets that have stood the test of time. And look, I want to be really clear, though. You don't buy gold and silver to get rich. You do it to protect and preserve your wealth. There's a reason why nations like China, Russia, etc., are moving towards backing their currency with gold, and why the elites are buying up physical gold and silver like we've never seen before. But they don't want you to know that. They want you to lose everything when the dollar crashes. So now's the time to protect your financial future. And for this, I'm confident recommending Kirk Elliott. You can buy gold and silver directly, even in small amounts, or you can transfer your IRA into physical gold and silver with zero taxes or penalties. Kirk Elliott is an amazing Christian patriot, and he's dedicated to helping people secure their financial futures. So if you want to learn more about this, open up a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900 to speak to someone right now. Kirk Elliott's team of advisors will answer all of your questions and take care of you every step of the way. Again, that's 720-605-3900 or goldwithseth.com. All right, folks, let's go ahead and jump into this discussion with Scott Kesterson from BardsFM. All right, Scott, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the Man in America show. Welcome, and thank you for being here, man.
Hey, well, thank you, Seth. It's always a pleasure to be here. We had a great show last week and really enjoyed it, and glad to be here. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I will tell I'll tell folks that if you walk through the whole household, there's a good chance that you'll hear Scott Kesterson's voice on in the background, because you're one of the podcasts that's consistently playing. It's not just recently, actually. You were pretty pivotal, especially in 2020, before the election. Going into county by county, and just a lot of what you're talking about was just really helped to lay a foundation. And that was before I was even in front of the camera or behind a microphone. And it's always cool talking to you, because I'm like, oh, I know this voice. Is the guy that I hear all the time. So thank
awesome.
you for
Thank
what
you.
you're doing. You have a very important message you're putting out there. And I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. So I think what's really neat is that our audiences share a lot. I mean, I hear it all the time. It's like I get the feedback of what they listen to. And there's a very discerning group out there that's very clear on where they go, and your name always comes up. I just think that's a fantastic statement to just the messages coming out, and also the what people are seeking. They're really seeking some solid, I just find it consistently, obviously, faith. And when I use the term knowledge, it's not limited. It's kind of the two things I say about the podcast: faith and knowledge. Faith is solid, and we do it every show. But the other part is knowledge, and it weeds out a lot of the peripheral, um, some of this conspiratorial trends that are happening again pretty heavily on the Patriot side. And I'm not calling out any particular account, but there is a real hunger for applicational knowledge. So understanding how things are moving and shaking, and then what can people do? And I think those consistently, and when your name comes up, I mean, I know you prep, I know you talk about it. I think it's fantastic. Your story is different than my story, and it's exactly what people need, because we need to be sharing this knowledge as much as possible and our experiences. And literally, that's helping reshape the narrative landscape of the nation, which I think is huge.
It's when you say faith and knowledge, because that's a repeating across a lot of what you're doing. Like to me, it's both of those combined equal truth. Is that
Yes.
like you can't have truth without faith, right? In my opinion, like because it's like truth is not just the reality sitting in front of us. It's the divine realms. It's God. It's Christ. It's everything together that gives us truth. And I think that knowledge is actually the database and the understanding of that truth and the wisdom of that truth. And so I think faith and knowledge lead you to that truth. And I find that what I appreciate is that you're discerning. And I see that across the landscape of different podcasters or influencers, that there's varying levels of just being discerning. I think there's a lot of idol worship, and people are just constantly looking for the next hero. They're focused on the elections, which I'm not saying it's a bad thing necessarily in principle, but I find that with your approach that you're just digging into what the real issues are. And the further we go in this whole process, the more for myself, I only want to talk about the real issues. I'm tired of talking about putting my hopes into false idols, putting my hopes into elections that we know are completely rigged, putting my hopes into so many things that are just outside of my own control. And I really appreciate that about what you're doing.
Well, thanks, Seth. I mean, I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is, and this is a war zone. We're in a battlefield. And I think what we forget, not I'll use a collective we, because more in the terms of the patriot movement, is that as in war, there are battles and you have to pivot. So there's contact with the enemy, so to speak, and you're going to engage for a certain period of time. You might do what's called a retrograde, which is to pull back and reposition. You might pursue and break through the enemy's lines and destroy them and then move on to the next target. It's just a variety of things. But what tends to happen is people get highly fixated on singular topics. And in doing singular topics, we become blinded by the way the enemy's moving. I think there's it is examples of this. I mean, and I see this a lot in the Patriot movement. It'll be like one topic. So, for example, there was a time when everybody was looking at China, 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 China. That's because it was being echoed by President Trump as China. And then that becomes the COVID virus. And then but there's a lot of other things happening in parallel to all this that we're not paying attention to. And as we start to understand that the enemy is constantly giving you the direction in which they want you to look, you need to start looking twice as hard where they don't want you to look. So, as an example, in the middle of the elections, coming out of the elections, we get the FTX collapse, which I think is a mix of both intentional and accidental release. I think it's a two-edged sword on that one. I think that there's some collapse that was going to happen because they needed to have the excuse to set up regulation. And I think that there's a level of exposure that comes out of that they're not comfortable with, because that starts to reveal GOP and Democrat senators all handshaking, which they all do anyway. But it really proves the uniparty concept. So as that then happens, then we get the release of the Epstein names, which is like, oh, well, look at this. So everybody runs over to the Epstein names and look at this. We're going to figure it out. But it takes everybody away from that deeper pit of what is FTX really doing? Like these are the darker questions. And then Balenciaga comes up. And so that's another one now that they're trying to move around and keep you off track. They're talking about all sorts of different things to keep you away from Balenciaga. Of course, Balenciaga is doing their apology, and people are kind of doing a head nod. Okay, well, I guess it was an accident, and missing the most obvious aspects. We can talk more about if you want, but I've been talking about this at length. And behind all of that, then suddenly, as the invisible hand is moving around, this is the one I really love. Russia goes from saying no cryptocurrency blockchain exchanges to where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're like, oh, we're going to accept blockchain for foreign payments. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, that was the biggest sleight of hand we've ever seen, because now when everyone's looking to Putin to kind of like break from central banking, they just went right back into central banking, just like that. And that's tying in with the CBDC, that's tying in with the digital currencies, it's tying in with the dollar that's falling, it's tying into China's issues on who controls the whole markets. And really, we step back and look at this, we're like, okay, if you're going to play their theme and their narratives, we're just going to be yo-yos on a string. And I think this is where I come to. This is one of the things I did when I'd done it all my life, and I can appreciate you. I know you can appreciate what I'm going to say because I listen to you and you do similar things. We don't build context and historical reference enough in what we're doing.
Yeah.
So we tend to take things in snapshots in the current movement. And that's extremely dangerous. Current history has no root. Just like you said a bit ago, you can't have truth without faith. You can't have knowledge and faith. If you don't have those two together, you're not going to get truth. So there's a balance and a contextual aspect that we have to constantly seek to build. And if we're not getting it, then we're going to be moving around like a fly bouncing from one spot to the other. And that's effectively what we're seeing a lot in the Patriot movement. And that leads to some very dangerous things, which is the jumping on grandiose conspiracies and trying to always find a savior that's going to save the day and missing the point that we are accountable and responsible for where this goes.
It's such an important point, and one way that I look at it is I think that with the journey that I've gone through, and my wife as well, we've gotten to a place where it's kind of like regardless of what happens out there, we're kind of prepared to weather the storm. And not
Mhm.
just in terms of prepping or food or whatever, spiritually prepared, mentally prepared. And I think that what it is that there's this constant, not necessarily constant, but there's just this mentality of like looking to the external to to see that our nation is going to be saved or to see that good things are happening. And when you have an entire group of people that are all just focused on the external and they're saying, look, oh, Elon Musk is a patriot now. And he's, there's what happens is that it causes you, in my experience too, is it causes me to let go of my discernment a little bit. You let yourself go a little bit, and how many times has that happened to us? Where whether it's Durham or Barr or all the different people that we've put our hopes into, or even events, the Maricopa audit, the Cyber Symposium, Carrie Lake. There's all these different things, and I feel like that what it is if you take a step back, they're all just bread and circuses. And I'm not saying that they're bread and circuses from the perspective that they're that trivial, but it's like anything that's outside of what we're doing in our own lives to secure our own sovereignty is just a bread and circus. And I think that what causes it though is that when for me, if I'm not really grounded in my faith and grounded in my just focusing on what I have control around me, it makes me much more likely to look for confidence outside of me and to say, "Oh, look what Ron DeSantis is doing, or look what Elon Musk is doing," and I think that that's a dangerous place actually, because I really do believe that the only way that we can save this nation and really save this world is that each individual builds a relationship with God. each individual strengthens their moral compass. Each individual takes care of their family, their land, their community. That's how we fix this. But and I think that the more we focus on these external things, it's quite frightening. And when I look at what's happening with Twitter, and I'm going to throw this out there, and I'd love to get your feedback on this. What we have happening with Twitter is that all of a sudden everyone feels like, wow, we can now say whatever we want to. Twitter just got rid of their COVID misinformation policy. You can talk about COVID now. Elon's going to let all of the anons are going to get back on Twitter, and they're going to fight their meme war. They're going to fight their truth war. But the one thing that not many people are talking about as it relates to Elon Musk is his ties to China, right? And his companies, a lot of his companies are really built on a lot of the technology, the batteries, the technology coming out of China. And even now, when we see these protests happening in China, he's been silent on it. And if you look back and you research, because when he first kind of got thrust into the limelight, I did some deep dives into him and showed a lot of areas where he was praising the CCP so much. It was very heavily, and I was worried about that. And so, but what it makes me think is like, is this a 100 Flowers campaign? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this in under communist China. I forget when it was. I think it was under Mao. It was probably maybe in the 60s or 70s, roughly. And don't quote me on the time. But they had a campaign. It's called the 100 Flowers campaign. And what they did is that they invited all of the intellectuals in China to come out and talk. It's like, look, we're now going to welcome you. We're struggling with communism, and we're going to all welcome you to come out and share your ideas about how you think we could better run the country. And so they gave them this comfort. They can all really speak the truth. And then the next step is they killed every single person that stepped out, because that was their way of basically trapping all of the people that would be the ones that were, kind of subverting the communist ideology because they thought differently. So all the free thinkers were led into this trap. They shut the door and basically shot everybody up. And so it makes me think, is that what's happening now? Like, is everything happening with Twitter, for instance, is it tied into China in some way? And is it tying into this grand scheme? So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because it's a pretty complex issue.
Well, it's interesting. I've talked about it in a little different light, but I think that you're onto something. And it was kind of what before the show we mentioned. I had mentioned this on the show the other night. So I'll frame it first this way. If I was Lucifer, the first thing I would want to do is go and acquire Twitter. And I would, because it's such an influence hub. And I would get rid of every fool that was exposing my plan, which would be translated to the woke, because they've all been exposing my plan so aggressively that I can't hide anymore. They're bringing it to light. Then I would offer to be the great savior of mankind by bringing in the whole idea of the future. All this group I've awakened with this idea of technologies which I can track them with, things like electric cars, and we're going to have brain implants, and we're going to have solar energy, and we're going to have battery technology. And of course, that's all tying to the great motherland of China, right? Like you're talking about. And we're going to have AI systems that'll run your life, and we're going to make your life easier. And it's all IoT stuff. And I've got a huge following in this scenario of millennials and Gen Z that are just loving everything. Matter of fact, they almost worship me. So this is good. And I'm going to talk to them, and I'm going to get rid of their extremes and remove them. And then I'm going to do something even greater, because by talking of the values of free speech and those constitutional issues, but I'm not going to mention God. This is important, but I am going to talk about the Constitution without God. And in doing so, I'm going to bring over a huge chunk of patriots. They're going to be the ones that are going to be my engine. And we're going to bring two groups of people together. And ultimately, I'm going to put them on a whole new platform here where they can all agree, for the safety of things, we need to get identity verification. And as we build identity verification, then I'm going to openly do things that I know will trigger the rest of the woke crowd that's in Silicon Valley. Get my app banned from Apple, but I've already got a phone ready to roll, so that's another product. And the best part is I'm being funded by taxpayer dollars, because so much of it's coming out of the Department of Defense. And then we're going to flip the switch on Skynet, or Skylink, whatever we call that. And I'm going to get everybody wired in together, and I'm back to winning. And then the next level is, it's going to be an easy step to sell them on technology and the advancements it makes under a safe new world and getting brain implants because it's a choice you can make. You don't have to have them. We're going to just use all, and we're going to slowly weed out the ones that were the greatest resistance to this whole plan are actually the woke. We already got them out. And then the next level is to find out those that don't want to participate in brain implants and Twitter, and that's another level. So I think you're onto something, and I think what we're seeing is, and this is where it gets kind of eerily Q-ish in a real dark way, which is we'll all be united together in the end. It's like, how's that going to happen, right?
Yeah,
So,
singularity and
right, and so we end up with another strange thing, which is, that there's some really good stuff that's coming out around this Balenciaga topic. And I mentioned it to you earlier. I'm going to pull up his name real quick again, but it's a model. I didn't know of him today. His name is Gianni Salvatore. He's just a high-end fashion model, and he's come out very outspoken against Balenciaga and kind of giving us the backstory of what's going on inside the fashion industry. Really bold. I think he's at a point in his career, obviously, where the money doesn't mean much to him anymore, but his integrity means more, which is good. I think that's a great thing. But when we start to see how all this works together and we're understanding how all these pieces coming together, these folks are all part of the same club. So we see Balenciaga and the horrors that are there, and we go, wow, this is unbelievable. And it is. And then we look over at Elon Musk, and he's supposedly trolling everybody, according to Patriots, wearing a Baphomet costume. But what's really happening here is they're showing you, this is the way they always work. They show you, you make the choice. Elon Musk is out in front showing you. Imagine you or I wearing a Baphomet outfit and on our shows and saying, okay, I'm just trolling.
exactly.
That might work for one show as a joke. But if that became my avatar, people would be like, what are you doing? I introduced a new service, it was a new sponsor we brought onto the show. And I was impressed with what their mail services is. And
Oh,
I won't
is
have
it
to get in.
Start Mail, right?
Yeah, Start Mail.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Startmail.com/bards.
exactly, startmail.com. So I'm just bringing that out, just not to pitch it, but I'm making a point here because you'll hear the pitch on the show. So there you go. But my point of it is I'm really impressed with my Patriots because they dig in deep. And I got a question this morning is this the right, some really good digging on that company. And as I said, there's nothing perfect. I think it has some good options, and that's why I'm offering it, because I'm very discerning on who I bring on as a sponsor. But my point is that even to that point, they're making sure, they're asking me, is this really a good thing? And I'm happy with that. Okay, their research is good. Why aren't we doing that with Musk? Why aren't we doing that with Tulsi Gabbard? I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, you've done your own digging and you know about where she is. I mean, she was posing with Antifa during the height of the Trump Antifa conflict. This is a person that was put into office by John Podesta. This is a person who was married to a 14 or 16-year-old boy when she came back from Iraq, and suddenly that kid disappears. I had to go to somebody in Cyber Command to find a picture of him. He's been erased from the web, which tells you some really high-end operations. Somebody's cleaned up her account so that won't show up. The father of that kid was a member of a cult or a leader of a cult, and that same cult has a strange connection to the quote, not cult, but cult that she was part of, that she married her current husband in. And we know she has communist ties, was part of the WEF. And yet suddenly she denounces the Democrat Party, and she's sitting in for Tucker Carlson, and she's becoming the new hero of the right. I mean, this is the lunacy that we're seeing here of people so eager to find somebody else to fix it for them.
Exactly.
That's that trap of idolatry that we come into, and in doing it, and it's a horrific trap. You are walking into the maze they want you to be in and not freeing yourself at all. And that's ultimately where the matrix is. I think it was well said the other day. We talk about different syndromes, and they refer to this as the Mr. Smith syndrome, which is, if you remember Mr. Smith from The Matrix, where he would just, that was the, and it was really excellent. It's like how suddenly you're following somebody and then they become this defender of the Matrix. That's essentially what we're seeing a lot of this, like, so I don't know. I mean, this is a challenging time. And I think that it takes a lot, and to your point, it takes a lot of discernment on a daily basis. It's tiring. I don't, that's part of what our job needs to be in communicating these harder truths. What's at the where do they not want you to look? And as you and I talked at the beginning, and I've just been on I've talked about it a lot over the history of the channel, but I've really been hitting it hard the last few shows with this Balenciaga thing, and especially last night on my rant. But it was, the whole point of this was that our biggest issue here is children. I mean, if we're going to cut away everything, and I'm so sick of talking about elections. I just don't, because it's like they're rigged. Okay, let's talk about that. They're rigged. Well, we're going to have a red wave. No, we're not. But okay, I mean, even if you have a red wave, they're going to be people that are on the side of the deep state. They're not getting through a rigged gateway. It's owned by some version of the organized crime global network. So is the trafficking of kids. And the darkest part about that is that we're complaining about miscounts and ballots, and we're looking at stuffing of ballot boxes, and we're worried about these paper transactions. And I understand that's important. I'm not minimizing this to where it's to the point of not being important, but what's your center point of focus? Because while we're worried about all of that, and we have a government that can tell everybody, can basically tell you where everybody is at any moment in the day, they can find a terrorist, so to speak, anywhere in the world. Just give them a little bit of time, they'll track you down to some mud hut in the middle of Pakistan. But how can we not know where 700 to 800,000 children go every year, and not have a national database that tells you what's happening to every single one of them, who's been recovered, who hasn't, and where are all these children across our border coming in and going, that are being put into military bases and literally being flown around the country? I mean, this is the darkest of dark. And as a public, we're just not giving much care to it. And we're seeing parents wake up to, like, oh my goodness, they're teaching my children gender issues and to like pedophilia in schools. Well, yeah, I'm glad you're waking up, but this is just, I mean, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. So that's literally like, looking at the dust on top of the iceberg, because where it goes and how deep this goes is the real issue of the world. And if you want to change the world, then let's get to the core of the children. Let's talk about what it takes to protect them, and let's talk about what it takes to get rid of that evil. Because you get rid of that evil, now Babylon falls, and that's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a deep issue, and I think the part of it is that it's hard for a lot of people to even look at it, right? And I think that especially with people that are more, moral, or, say, of the more conservative yoke, it's harder for them to look at these really evil things, because it's like they don't want to imagine that evil even exists, but
Mhm.
it does, right? It does, and I think that if we're framing this time we're in right now as a battle of good and evil, in my opinion, children, especially a newborn baby, like that's in my own experience, that's as close as you're going to get to God here on earth, is looking into the eyes of this newborn life. When my daughter's 2 years old, and I had her up on the camera for you before we started, and you got to meet her, and she's just this little precious angel. And I think that, like, talk about, like, what is the canary in the coal mine of a civilization that has gone too far to the darkness. And you look at how the children are treated, and you look at what's happening with them. And I couldn't agree more. This is the big issue. I mean, and there's a lot of big issues, but this is it. I mean, this is the future of our world, is really these children. And if you look at the indoctrination in schools, which you're right, it's just the tip of the iceberg. You start looking into the fact that a lot of the schools are tapped into the human trafficking networks. A lot of those networks are tied into CPS and all the different government organizations, which are tied into the cartels. And as you start peeling away the layers of the onion, you realize that at the middle, there's this very dark underbelly. And I think you played a video on your show recently, which I had seen, the same day, I think, I think it was a Russian, which you thought may have been a paratrooper,
Mhm.
describing what he had experienced in Ukraine, where he was talking about these, if I remember correctly, underground facilities with children where they're just basically butchering them.
Mm.
And it's just like, and that's just a small part of it. You get into organ harvesting, adrenochrome. I mean, it goes so deep. It's just it's unfathomable.
It does go deep, and it goes deeper than these people have gone so deep with this that they've woven their business of child sex trafficking into most of the businesses that they own and control. Um, there is a video that surfaced a while, or an audio file that has surfaced, and it's been around. And so I'm only referencing this because of the reactions, because I can't tell you that what is said here is been proven. I'm going to be clear about that. But it deals with the Jewish holiday and the fact that they're using children's blood to make their favorite meatballs or whatever they're doing. But there's a snide comment made in this that should have just had people on their feet, even as a snide comment, which is, oh, when we get through, we just use the kids in the hamburger meat that you eat at McDonald's.
Yeah, I heard that.
Okay. I mean, all right. So let's just say the whole thing is made up. Fair enough. They got some pretty good circulation. Where is the outrage to ask who did this? Right? We get worked up as I do. There's a group of people that always get worked up about stuff. We have Jesse Smollett event, the fake hanging, right? And people get all dialed up about that, which is complete LARP right from the start. But a comment like this on a file happens, and people don't come unglued. I mean, it's like that in itself should just be an atrocious comment to make. I mean, and I'm just taking it at face value of the comment, not even whether there's some validity to the truth, right? Where we just don't. There was an experiment. I just saw it today, and it was an interesting social experiment where they literally have a child. It's all set up. It's walking down among people, and a guy comes out of nowhere and grabs the kid and runs. And people literally they just kind of half turn their head. It's like, oh, and they just keep walking. We are so unconscious as a culture to children and to the horrors that are happening around us that we're not asking questions. I had an encounter when I was on my trip that it still bothers me a great deal. And it happened so fast. And I mean, and I couldn't getting to the guy, but he brings a little girl out at night. Okay. He's carrying her, and it looks kind of like dad, daughter, kind of. And as I walked in, I saw the guy, said hello, and I was getting gassed up. And I looked down and I see the girl, and she's wanting to go back into the teddy bears inside this truck stop. And as I see all this happening quickly, he quickly sweeps her up and gets her into the car, and it all settles into my head. It's like, why does she have a bandage on her vein on her little right arm? Right? I mean, and it's like before I can react, he's gone. Okay. So my question is, I understand these things are there and we don't always have the ability. I'm not faulting people for not being able to step in because sometimes it happens so fast. But if we're not reflecting on it and training ourselves once again to be situationally aware, it's going to continue to happen. That heightened my situational awareness. I don't know what happened to that little girl. It could have been innocuous and innocent. I own the piece that I didn't react quickly enough. But at the same time, it's made me hyper vigilant now when I see stuff. And it is my business to ask. And whether it may make a parent feel uncomfortable, sorry, we're not in a time when it's your opportunity to be comfortable, because we have to accept as a culture that this trafficking is real, and it's a highly toxic and deadly game that they're playing. And we're seeing, all one has to do really to sit back on all of this. We talk about the elections, which has been a hyper focus. Maricopa County to me is it's a honeypot for the wrong reasons. And I'm highly suspect of Maricopa County. Everybody knew Maricopa County was going to be rigged. We knew it going in. And so now everybody's focus is down there. We've talked about patriot vigils down there. We've had people swarming Maricopa County. Okay, I got it. But why always Maricopa County? Why? It's almost like it's like the same thing. They're trying to show you where it's going to be rigged, so you'll follow where it's going to be rigged. So you'll keep your eyes on that. There wasn't that sort of focus in Philadelphia. We didn't have that focus in other markets like Portland, Oregon, but which we know is corrupt, even though they found Antifa stuffing ballots. But Maricopa County, because they put a personality with it, Carrie Lake, who I again am highly suspect of because Carrie Lake was a huge Obama supporter. Could she have become a conservative patriot? You bet. I'm not saying it. But we've never asked the hard questions as to how did you go from being a huge door knocking Obama supporter to being a Trump supporting patriot, anti border, anti immigration, pro gun person? I'm just curious because those two things are opposite ends of the normal spectrum, right? So all eyes are there, but we don't have the vigils for trafficking kids. We don't have anybody. Where's our vigils for the January 6th folks? I mean, there's so much of this going on, and there's real harm being done, and there's an unconsciousness that's settled into this public. Somehow, I think it's, I have a lot of theories why, but ultimately we're dealing with this hyper adrenalized moments that people want to be drawn to, which is a huge problem, by the way. And that's a long rabbit hole of how the public has become addicted to themselves. It's literally the adrenaline of the brain that people are addicted to. And so they go to these hyper adrenalized moments. They draw them in. Elections are one of those because the media hypes it up. I mean, if the media is hyping it up, it's stay away from it. That's my general rule, right? And if if everybody's eyes are on it, look the other way. Those are just simple rules to follow. And when you start doing that, then you start to see stuff. There's it's not the treatise, but it's something like the treatise of the Louis Bonaparte, which was written by Karl Marx. Okay. And oh yeah, Karl Marx, that trigger word that everybody says, oh my goodness, you're a communist. It's like, no, actually the guy did some amazing research. And in that particular piece, he talks about what he refers to as the dialectic, which is in a simple terms is the facade of what they have you look at and what's really going on behind the scenes. He does an amazing job of looking at the French Revolution from that lens. We're seeing the same thing now. We need to train ourselves to realize that what's in the media, what's in the headlines is just, it's either done to draw your attention there or there's a whole bunch more behind that story you have to dig into. And again, the latest of these stories is Balenciaga. And I think and this is just me as a researcher saying this. I see FTX pop up. I see how quickly FTX has been moved off of the main docket. I see how quiet they've gotten about a number of things like the food shortages, about the state of our military, about the whole switching over to CBDC. And then we have Balenciaga crop up. Now, I can't tell you what that weave looks like, but I'm going to tell you there's one weave in there that I will guarantee it's going to bring it together, and it's going to be children and the blood of children. And that sounds dark to people. As it makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry. But when you water that down, you're going to find out it's going to be worse than you ever imagined. And those graphics that you're seeing now coming out of the fashion designer for Balenciaga, they're going to seem like child's play when you get into the core of this. Because you don't demonstrate what you are, you demonstrate the areas where you're comfortable with. So a fashion designer isn't going to show the darkest of dark. They're going to show the things that are on the edge of shock and awe, but they're not going to show you what the real darkness is. And that's what Balenciaga is. Balenciaga is showing us that hole that goes there, that to me links it all, that brings all the children back into view, is so horrific. It's so dark. It is so disturbing that what we'll discover, and I'm guaranteeing we're going to get to it. It will make Pizzagate look like a preschool event. We'll start to understand why FTX was such a big deal, why so many GOP members of Congress were signing to stop the investigation into FTX. We're going to see the connections of Ukraine and we're going to see the connections of Ukraine and the overflowing of their adoption system. Why are there so many orphans in Ukraine? A question nobody's asking. How come those attorneys always somehow link back to big people back in the United States that offer adoption? What is it again? It's children, always children, always children.
It is, and there's a lot that you kind of touched upon there, but there's something I want to highlight, which I think is really important. And these are some understandings I'm having kind of emerge in this conversation. Is that if you look at the role of technology in the media, because they're interlinked. Before we had televisions, people would sat around the radio. And before the radio, maybe they had the printing press, right? And then you get the local newspaper that would come in. But what's happened is that as all of this has progressed, obviously we can see that they can build these massive human trafficking networks. They can build these massive money laundering networks, especially as you bring in crypto, like FTX. To me, it's this a giant global slush fund. It's a giant cabal. It's like they love it. It's like, oh, go put all your money into this Bitcoin, go throw all your money into these exchanges. We're going to take that money and then run all of our operations with it, all these black, dark operations without you even knowing. And if you're lucky, you can still pull that money out once things kind of start to hit the fan. But if you kind of come back, and this is what I've always appreciated about your program, is that it comes back to just the county by county approach. And I think that one of the themes and what I see us tonight is this idol worship of it's always a new hero, right? It's the Kerry Lake, it's the Tulsi Gabbard, it's the Durham, it's the Barr, it's the Trump, it's Elon Musk, and the list goes on. And I think that this is a symptom of modern society, because if you go back to, say, the 1920s, you didn't have that kind of idol worship. How would you have done it? Maybe you read in the newspaper that, the president did this, or, a certain celebrity did this, but people weren't obsessed with it. And instead, they were obsessed with their community and they were linked into the people around them. But what's happened is that over time, I think it's absolutely part of their plan, that they've gotten us to become so focused on what Tucker Carlson's saying and on what, politician is doing something, that it's like we care more about someone like that than our own friends and family in our community. But when the going gets tough, your neighbor that you build a relationship with, that's also a patriot, that that knows how to clean a deer or to slaughter a chicken, or your other family member that has a wood burning stove that'll get through the winter. Those people are infinitely more important than all of these celebrities, all these influencers, everything. And I think it's like, when I go back to the whole bread and circuses, it's like it couldn't be more accurate, because we've all become focused, and not all of us, I'm saying a lot, especially a lot of your listeners. I think my listeners are really much more focused on what's around them, but we've really replaced the relationships and the strength of our community and everything with these people. And it's actually like you're focused on this one particular, say Elon Musk, this guy's going to save the country. Well, it's actually like your local sheriff is 1,000 times more important to the security of your future than Elon Musk is. Yet have you put, and I'm telling myself this too, right? Because like I actually haven't met my local sheriff, and it's like shame on me, right? Because like I've been here for over a year. There's no excuse for that. But it's like actually my own local sheriff plays a million times more important of a role than Elon Musk does in terms of my own security. And so I think that's one of the ways that they've really duped us. But I also think that by understanding that, it helps us to kind of deconstruct it and figure out what we have to do now. Because I think that we've seen, right? It's like, okay, 2020 is stolen. Okay. And like, okay, now we're going to spend the next year trying to fix 2020. You still can't fix 2020. Okay, now we're going to spend the next year preparing for the midterms, right? Okay, vote red wave, midterms come. Midterms are stolen. So, okay, maybe we're going to spend the next year, fighting the legal battles for the midterms. We get to 2023, and it's like, okay, well, now we got to get focused on getting Trump back in. And we're going to focus all of our energy back into the next year, which is going to take us to 2024, and they'll probably steal the election again. You know what I mean? And what it's done, though, is it's kept all these people, right? It's kept all these people that could have been really focusing on building their local communities, on fortifying their homes, on, building home churches or whatever it is they could be doing. And instead, they're out, canvassing for politicians, and I'm not knocking that. Again, I'm not, I think that's it's great how many people have stepped forward, but it makes me think that it's like when the music stops, we're going to look back and realize that we lost our chair 3 years ago. But we were so busy running around in circles while the music was playing, we didn't realize that our chair was gone 3 years ago.
I think you're dead on. And it's one of these things that I am pretty outspoken on elections because it's all a circus. How much time do we need to campaign to make a decision? I think that's a big question that we need to come to grips with. A president comes into office in the first year, they get something done. In the second year, there's now beginning to be discussions about him running. In the third and fourth year, he's campaigning while trying to do policy. So effectively, we get 18 months out of a 4-year contract. The same thing is happening with every politician. Congressmen are the worst because they're in for 2 years. So they get about 3 to 4 months and then they're campaigning again, right? So how long do we need to campaign to make a decision on somebody? If we can't see them work, which they're not, all they're going to do is make promises, which they do, and those promises are going to fall empty, which they always happens. So then we're shocked. We're like, oh my goodness, he broke his promise. No, he had to make promises because you wouldn't have voted for him anyway because that's what you want. It's constantly like Pavlov's dog sort of concept. So I, to your point about prepping and how I personally push on this channel, which is the 7 pillars of county by county. And I think it's very important that we keep our hands dirty in this process, meaning doing something in your life, sowing seeds physically, not just spiritually. And that's the metaphor I like to use. So I have a place I'm at with the urban place I have here in the town. I have a small, what I call an urban homestead. So it's about, this is about 1/8 of an acre roughly that we had a really good success last year. And we'll bring in between the fruit trees and the garden, we'll bring in all of the produce that we need off of that little piece of land. And that's a beautiful thing. And I haven't brought protein onto this yet because I have another acreage where I'm doing that. That's the 80 acres that I have with another person. And I spend now about 3 days here, and I've built a podcasting studio up there. So I'll be 3 days up there, and then I have a float day. Okay. But my point is it's constantly working. But part of that is that in this messaging, and in any travel that we do, in and around that, and I know you're the same, that's why I'm saying this, because you've got to get your hands physically dirty. You have to dig into the dirt. You've got to anchor yourself in with what's real. The communication we're having is essential. I mean, this is an information war, and the idea is to keep that truth out there, but that truth is anchored in knowledge and faith. You framed that very well at the beginning. And that knowledge is not just knowledge of what the latest headline is, or some conspiratorial vision of how Trump's going to come back because they're going to pass this measure or do this thing in the courts, or white hats are going to come sweeping in and arrest everybody. Worry about your neighborhood because, as I've said many times, and I really, really mean this in such a true way, you don't want the military rolling down your streets. I don't care if Q said it or not. That's not where you want to be. And there is this sort of euphoric idea still that that's a good idea. And it's like, okay, folks, do please be honest with where our military is. It has become a woke institution. It has become an institution highly saturated by the vax. That in itself has physiological outcomes and consequences that we are still trying to figure out. So what we have to get to is this realization that all institutions are corrupted. They're all built on the metaphor of the house and sand. How do we build a country on the rock of faith? And that's us. That's us every single day digging in and doing the little things. And this is where growing food is such an important one because it takes back something they took from us, or even worse, we gave it to them. We start to take back our responsibility, our ownership, our ability to feed ourselves, which is a significant issue. And then we move to each step. And as you and I've talked at length, and we each talk on our own shows, you start to unravel this onion and you're like, oh, wow, look at this. For example, I'm on city water rather than well water. Well, how can I get around that? What happens if they shut the water off? What happens even worse? So forget shutting it off. What happens if This happened, by the way, in Arizona or New Mexico. What happens if your people that work at the water bureau in the city die because they took the vax? Now, what happens in the replacement talent? Well, it's not going to be replaced overnight. Those aren't jobs; those are skill sets, right? To run that equipment, you don't just call up your temp labor outfit and go, "Hey, by the way, I need somebody that knows how to run the chlorine injector systems and whatever else they put in your water," right? So, I mean, this is a very critical time to reclaim skills because the system is changing and it was engineered to be a kill off and a die off of a portion of humanity to try to force us and propel us into this scenario of city modeling, which is the Agenda 2030, basically a remake of the feudal system. And that's what they're trying to do. And in the meantime, we've got to be very aware of those pieces. But how do you, that's the real deeper knowledge. That's where, when what we're sharing here, we need to understand the movement of the enemy. And then there needs to be each one of us exploring that depth, not only in our faith, which is so critical, but also in our richness of knowledge of the things that will sustain us. And then that means as we put those two pieces together, we gain wisdom and we gain a different temper towards how we approach the problems in our nation. We're literally building out a new nation around us when we do this. And in that sense, I'm very optimistic. Um, but at the same time, the savagery that is going on those other sides to try to rip away the future of the nation, again, it's going to go back to those critical things that we need. It's the savagery of trying to disrupt the food system. It's the savagery of trying to disrupt the climate. It's the savagery of trying to use electronics and communication systems like 5G and to normalize that as people, it causes massive health problems and neurological problems. And just as for your own channel, that's my opinion. So I say that in case people want to get all dialed up about that. But that just happens to be one of those hot buttons.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I'll be publishing an interview soon with Dr. Robert Young, who basically
yes,
c- almost conclusively proves that 5G is affecting the graphene oxide in the vaccines, and it's like it goes deep. He says that, I think his quote, like, 5G is such a powerful weapon, it makes the atom bomb obsolete. Like,
I would
that's,
agree with that. See,
so
this
yeah,
is what I think you said something. I'm going to jump on that because this is really important. You're hearing all these tremors of nuclear war, and they've diminished, but they revamped, they resurfaced yesterday with the dumb headline that Japan now wants strategic nuclear systems. It's like, okay, good. I'm glad you want to get on the game too. And then my comment was, isn't it funny how all these countries can all coexist peacefully in Antarctica, but somehow we're all at war in the main body politic? Why is that? Because it's all fear, right? They want the eyes on those things that they've told you are weapons of mass destruction, which is nuclear and biological. That's where they want your eyes. They're not really telling you what's in those biolabs. They call it genomic weapon systems. That's not even really true because they haven't mastered the ability to modify our genes yet. They're playing with it. But where the real threat is and where it becomes every single day is the information war to shape your thinking, to build up your dark fears when all they have to do is they just have to say, we found a bioweapons lab. People are like, oh no. And right away you have all sorts of video games that pop into people's head, like say Biohazard or whatever else is out. There's a bunch of them. You have horror movies that come into play. You have all these scenarios that you've been propagandized to believe the end of humanity because someone's going to drop a little vial in the middle. What is it? 13 monkeys or 11 monkeys, whatever
yeah,
that show
yeah.
is. You know, you drop a vial and the whole world dies. I mean, they've got everybody conditioned to accept this. The real weapon is us. They've weaponized us. This is the craziest part about this. And it's our fear and our willingness to accept this. So I have Coy Griffin coming on this week and Cowboys for Trump founder.
Yeah.
And he shared with me a court order, a restraining order that was put on him by a councilman at down in where he was, a county commissioner. And you read this and you have to ask yourself, like, what country am I living in? Not because they got the restraining order on him, it's the motive. It's a 77-year-old councilman that is talking about how frightfully panicked he was because Coe rode his horse up near him. I mean, like, really? Like, he didn't threaten you. He didn't brandish a 50 caliber machine gun in your face. He didn't pull a machete and put it on your throat. He rode his horse up next to you and even mentions it with the American flag flying. Well, what do you know? Right? And we're at this point in the public of insanity. And there is a collective insanity that's settled into our public that I have a general default. It's like, I think most of them are vaxxed, but that's not always true, but it's a good default for me anyway. And I do believe it because I think that what we've seen is there's been an instrument of war that's been waged upon people, but the fear is a critical component of it. And why I bring up the vax is there is some component to it that is keeping people in a fear state or at least susceptible to it. I don't know what it does exactly, but it does cross the blood-brain barrier. There is graphene oxide, there is nanotech in there, and it is affected by 5G. So collectively, we can say something's happening. And so we are at this place where the greatest weapons of mass destruction ever created is information. Information warfare is at its pinnacle. It's General Flynn has published a book called, something about 5G warfare. It's kind of interesting. I mean, in its principle, people don't even understand 3G warfare, third generation warfare, let alone 5G. And we're at 5G, which is literally this sort of undefined realm of fighters. We don't even know who your enemy is, and you're still being programmed with the idea that you're going to solve this problem with your Second Amendment. And the question I always ask is not whether you're going to defend your home, which you must, but if you're going to go out there and fight a war, who's your enemy? I mean, is your neighbor your enemy now because they're pro-vax and they're in a coma, walking around ignoring all of this? Is the politician the enemy who's denying talking about the vax, and he doesn't want to talk about the consequences of child sex trafficking, but they want to focus instead on 5G development and free cell phones? I mean, I'm not being sarcastic here. I mean, it's the enemy, the plane of who the real enemy is so pluralized at our level, and that's by design, because it's by design to keep you disempowered and ultimately to break your will, so that you will comply to whatever solution they deliver to you. And the only way through all of that, honestly, besides having skills to take care of yourself, the singular issue that keeps you protected is your relationship with God and through Christ Jesus. And if you don't have those, this world, and this is literally like a circus crazy train. This is like Ozzy Osbourne's song, Crazy Train, literally. And I can just hear it in my head. It's like, all aboard. It's like, yeah, no kidding. This is where we've gone so fast. We're in a world right now where pedophilia is being defended at a national debate level. And those that are doing pedophilia who are caught with it are now being protected by new laws so that they won't be discriminated against. We're mainstreaming child sex exploitation and sacrifice through the shock and awe campaigns of Balenciaga. And we're worried about whether Kari Lake's going to get voted in. I'm sorry, I have a problem reconciling that, because we knew Maricopa County was a sham to begin with, and all eyes are there while what else is going on over here? And the one thing that is always going on, and I don't mean to beat this to death so much, but it's such a pivotal issue. What never stops? It's sacrifice, trafficking, and a kidnapping of kids. I mean, it doesn't ever stop. When do we say eyes off the stupid, eyes on the real, drill into that and make that our pivot? Because I'll tell you, if children become our focus, and then we take on these other fights as they come along, like elections every 2 years, but children are a straight up vigilant focus, you will see Babylon's walls fall. They're coming down because they can't function without the children. And that goes in both in their ritual practice and their power. Remember, they don't deal with money like you and I. You know this. They deal with power and a commodity which they value more than money. Money, and what is that? Kids. That's a truth on a global level. So this is the hard truths of where we are. And again, people are always like, "Well, I don't believe it. I want to see hard truth." Well, start with Balenciaga. There's a good one. It's open. It hasn't been buried yet. You won't believe Pizzagate if you're not going to believe a lot of this, because that's all been disparaged and attacked by the likes of Media Matters and David Barak and all of his other communist clones over there. But the real fight is the children, always has been. And for to the point where it actually comes up in scripture as referencing children and the fact that we need to protect them, and that anyone that does harm or even leads to their corruption in their thinking in scripture, I'm paraphrasing, would be better off to have a millstone and cast into the sea than to have to confront Father God. That's telling you that children were there, have always been the target. I mean, we don't hear Christ talk about the corruption of the internet, and I realize it's not there, or the corruption of newspapers, or the corruption of election campaigns. I mean, that's kind of endemic in just the corruption of humankind. But to specifically call out one of the greatest sins being children, they've always been the target. And here we are today, and it's like they don't even rank. If you ask most people, they're not even going to rank children as a problem. That child sex trafficking is a problem. They're going to talk about the economy. They're going to talk about the election fraud. They're going to talk about the current government. And it's like, yeah, but all these other things exist because they don't want you to see this, right? And that's where, when we get down to kind of full circle to where we began this, which is discernment and getting to the core issues. To me, that is the core issue. And we have to come back to that regularly and remind ourselves what we're in this fight for. When we want to save humanity, you better save the children. It's bad enough that we cast our adults off into farms, literally, like we're done. But any society that doesn't nurture and take care of their elderly, and doesn't protect and nurture their children, has no future. It's just that simple.
Exactly. And I also think that a big part of this really is the spiritual battle. And it's like, okay, where does that battle take place? Is it at the poll? Is it creating memes? Is it, there's a lot of ways you can feel like that you're fighting this battle. But I think fundamentally, if God is looking down upon our nation and we're saying and praying, please, God, save our nation, my kind of thought is that his answer would be, well, make it a nation worth saving, because it's not right now.
I bet.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's on all of us. But I think that you're so right, because the protecting of innocence, the protecting of children, and I always go back to the school and the song in Sunday school. Jesus loves the little children, right? I love that song as a kid. And I always imagined like, oh, he loves me. I'm a child, right? It's this beautiful, beautiful thing as a child. But imagine if people put the energy that they've put into so many other things that haven't come to fruition into the children, into exposing CPS, into exposing what's happening. I know a lot of parents are now, and they're doing it through school systems, which is good, right? It's a forward step. But I think fundamentally, if God looked down and he saw that, I think that that's one of the highest expressions of morality, and is protecting God's pure creations here on earth.
I can't disagree at all. I mean, I think that this is, look, I'm not discounting any research. There's a lot of things that are happening in our world. We've got chemtrails that started in the 70s, and that's been a long fight for people that have pursued that, and they've been vindicated for the most part now. They realize that they are real. We've got these random fires that miraculously start up because of supposedly overburdens on transformers, which we know is all garbage. That's happening all over the Northwest. It just happens to overlay with the high-speed train corridor and the Agenda 2030 garbage that they want to do. So, I mean, I get this. We have the vanishing crab off the coast of Alaska that just all of a sudden are gone, the king crab. Like, what happened there? But, oh, wait a minute. The shell apparently has some tie to graphene oxide, and looks like the Chinese were up there mining that, use that in their graphene oxide. So yeah, there's a ton of problems. But this is one of these things where, like in any battle, there's always a ton of fights to take on. And you have to find that core place where you know that it's so decisive to the enemy that when you strike them, hit them hard and debilitate them in their one critical node, that the entire system gets shaken. There's a couple of critical nodes, but the children are a prime one.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if we spent our focus as a nation and as a world pushing into that fight on children, there's a couple of things that are very real about this. One, there is a point where it will become violent because they will defend it. But here's the other side of that. This is a violence that's truly righteous because you're defending something. It's not random, and you're going to see your enemy, and you're going to know your enemy, and you're going to bring justice as long as you're following God's hand. This is a righteous fight. And this is the one that once you rip it from their hands and you preserve the children, all the other ripples, the ripples that you create start to shake and tear apart their entire system. It is their critical node, is their Achilles heel. And that's why they don't want you to look at it. That's why Balenciaga is working overtime to try to make claims of like, oh, we were inappropriately handled. They're making us feel bad in the media. They're treating us poorly. Fortunately, there are some diligent researchers and good voices out there that keep pushing this topic. But you know that when Tucker Carlson actually mentions, as he did the other night, the idea that there's a conspiracy that the elite cabal actually are all pedophiles, you know how bad it is. Because Tucker Carlson's not dropping truth on you. He's trying to validate your opinions so that you can be less anxious to get to deeper truths behind it.
Exactly.
Right. So this is a pacification campaign and they see it coming. So, kind of my words on all this is choose your battles wisely. Think about the second, third, and fourth order effects of what you're doing. And when you do that, go aggressively after those things that will debilitate the enemy. And one of those is making sure that child sex trafficking ends forever. And that's the war that if humanity really took on, seriously took on, we've got the numbers, they have got nothing. But this is the other part. You don't have to worry about what the election's going to be. Because once you rip this one off, once you rip this Band-Aid off, there's nobody left, trust me, that's in the current system.
Yeah.
They're all gone. And you're going to want them gone. You're going to want them behind bars or hanging by a noose. And they're going to be deserving of it. Because at the end of the day, I don't care whether it was, I didn't mean to get wrapped up into it to, I did it on purpose. At the end of the day, it touches and stains almost everything in our national capital. It stains our government agencies. It stains corporate boardrooms. It stains Wall Street's profit line. It stains the International Banking Fund. It stains everything digital. We know this. So for me, there's one area that we all need to have our eyes on, and it's the children. It ties us to China. It ties us to Russia. It ties us to every country on earth that are all suffering from the same problem. And it does one thing greater than all things of that. It unites humanity in a single cause. And the only way that gets even stronger, and it must, is that alliance in faith. We come together under God to fight for the most glorious gift ever given, which is our children. And just seeing your daughter at the beginning of this, before we started, she's adorable. You have a beautiful child. You're blessed, really are. And it's just like I told you the story of some friends that came up to the property and brought their young daughter, say about the same age. You see God in their eyes. And let me tell you, when you see God in their eyes, you're just like, what else is there to fight for? That's what our mission is, ultimately. I'll say it like this. I will not give my life for a damn vote. I could care less. A rigged system is a rigged system. I'm not going to arms over that stupid thing. There's better ways to fight it. Do you want to see me go to arms? You want to see me willing to put my life on the line? It's a child. The said always in war, you see the greatest and the worst of humanity in war. I've seen the worst with the handling of children in war, not by us, but by them. But I've also seen some of the most courageous acts of heroism of soldiers and the most kind acts of people, soldiers and people alike, all for children. Let me tell you, that's the one piece that brings us together. It's the weave of who we are. It's our hearts. And if we don't get this right, I don't know what we're fighting for anyway.
Yeah.
You know, that's the bottom line. So I mean, that's where my heart is. It's you said in the beginning a little earlier, sometimes you just get tired of the news of just doing the same thing. Well, yeah, because there's no substance to it. At the end of the day, it's like the wind. One day it's on, one day it's off. And when we are nailing children, I mean, I'm talking about going after that problem and nailing the bad guys and saving them and protecting them and ensuring they get a wholesome education in life, allowing them to be children again. These kids, I've met a couple, your daughter appears to be that way just by her eyes, an ability to be a child. We don't give them that anymore unless you're protecting them in your home, as you should. But think about, as a community, we've just lost that. As a child, as a child of about 3 or 4, I could walk to the park around the corner, out a long ways from my parents' view, by myself, and go on the red slide at this city park with no worries of somebody coming and kidnapping me. I could go over and practice on the overhand bars and get good enough so that when my dad got home from work, we could go over and he could buy me an ice cream because I was able to go all 20 bars from one side to the other, right? That was a big accomplishment, but I was able to go there by myself. I was able to play in the neighborhood without the worry of somebody driving through and picking you up because the communities were together. This is in California, not today, not today, you know? So we've got to restore that. That's the real fight. And everything we do, we have to just restore that. And I don't think there's anything that should light people's fire more than that. So, for those that are out there and following Q or following, I'm not going to bash you for all that. I realize it's hope, it's fun, it's intriguing. There's a lot of amazing, interesting conspiracies to play with and concepts of maybe hope and change here or there. But at the end of the day, we have to be accountable for what we do that makes a difference. And that has to be, in whatever form we do it, the most important asset we have ever been entrusted with. And that's God's creation and its most earliest phases, and that's the children.
Oh, it absolutely is. Absolutely, yeah. It's when you really let it sink in,
Yeah,
which it should really weigh on you. And
it should.
as I know it does on you, I know it does on me, and I think a lot of our listeners and viewers feel that weight. So, well, Scott, this has been an incredible interview. I know that you've got another engagement to get to. You're a busy guy, and I appreciate your time on here. I want to pull up your website, but I also want to tell people, if you have gotten this far in the video or the podcast, please share this with somebody. All right, if you've gotten this far, you must have been somewhat entertained, or you're learning something from us, just two guys rambling together. So, if so, please do us a favor and share this with a friend or a family member or someone you think that needs to hear this message. Now, Scott, I've got your website ready here, which is just bardsfm.com.
Mhm.
Also, yeah, I know that you're very active on Podbean. I listen to you on
Yes.
either Podbean or also on Apple, podcast, depends on which one I'm just using. Sometimes Apple's a little more reliable. Anyway, I highly recommend anybody that's watching or listening to this, please go check out Bards FM. Honestly, he's the most recommended podcast to my friends and family. I'm like, hey, Mom, you listen to Bards yet? You got to go listen to Bards. It's a fantastic show that Scott puts on. I think you do 3 shows a day, 18 shows a week.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, so I do 3 shows a day and 4 on Thursday, and then 1 on Sundays. I guess that's 17. And there'll be a couple new ones coming up on Sunday this next year, which we'll talk more about. But we're going to add a sermon, a rotating pastors on Sunday morning for people, and then there's going to be a local show, which you and I've talked about. We're going to get involved with together, but just focusing on our county issues only, and kind of opening that up to encourage people to do the same. And so we'll talk a lot more about that. I want to make sure we do some podcasts together and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Great. Well,
You know,
Scott,
it's
thanks
been a
again for oh, go ahead.
well, it's just an honor being on your show. So thank you. It's a real you've got a great feel, and it's just relaxed to have a conversation, which I appreciate. And you've
Yeah,
got a great audience. Just to everybody that's here in Man in America, be blessed. You really have a great voice here. You're always welcome into Bards Nation over on our side, so to speak, and these virtual fences we create, so to speak. But we need to bring our communities together. Um, and so, for those that I can tell you, a lot of people on the Bard side listen to Man in America. And for those of you in Man in America, we open our doors to you. We've got a great online community, both on Telegram and both in our chat and the live streams on Podbean. And that's where we do live stream is on Podbean. And like I said, that door is always open. It's a wonderful communities that we bring together because we need it. We need to build the bridges. And it's just such an important time to build the bridges, to share the ideas, to share the wisdom with each other. It's really good. So thank you very much.
absolutely. Well, thank you, Scott. Take care and God bless.
And God bless. Thank you very much.